Thanks, good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to see you. Nice to see some familiar faces as well. I'd like to talk to you about work we've been doing on the infrastructure requirements for automated and zero-emission vehicles, which of course includes both battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So a bit of context first about what Infrastructure Victoria is. So we're the state of Victoria's independent infrastructure advisor, and we do a few different things, including a 30-year strategy for all forms of infrastructure. But one of our functions is for the government sometimes to give us tricky questions to answer. And that includes the question of, all right, well, if we're going to have a lot of automated vehicles and electric vehicles in the fleet in future, what infrastructure do we require to enable that to work? And why would we want to do that? And what are the sort of benefits and costs involved? One of the things we're able to do is bring an independent view, a very transparent view, and the transparency is important because all of what I'm going to talk about today, there's a whole bunch of technical reports that sit on our website if you're interested in knowing more, in addition to our final advice that we've given to the government. So if you're interested in that, that's all there, as well as some videos that explain some of what I'm going to cover as well. Another part that is important to us is collaboration, and so I do certainly want to acknowledge some of the people in the room, including from local governments and Climate Works and state government departments who've been on this journey with us along the way. So, as I said, the Victorian government really wanted advice on what is the infrastructure required if you have a really high proportion of highly automated vehicles in the Victorian fleet. And so what we're talking here is not the sort of automation that we're starting to see early days of now, but for those of you who speak the language, levels 4 and 5 of automation. So really we're talking these vehicles are self-driving in most or all conditions. So if we had a lot of the fleet like that, what does that mean for us? Similarly, what would it mean if we had all or nearly all of the fleet, either battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell? What would happen if we had changes to the way in which vehicles are owned and operated? And I'll come to that shortly. So we were looking at this through the lens of future scenarios because there's quite a lot of uncertainty around how this is all going to roll out. Probably a greater degree of certainty when it comes to battery electric vehicles. Some uncertainty, but decreasing uncertainty about hydrogen fuel cells, but Stuart's here so he can talk about that and answer all your questions. When it comes to automation of vehicles, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of opportunity, and also quite a lot of hype. And so what we wanted to do is test some of that through a scenario-based process. And we were looking at infrastructure requirements and what it might mean for land use. What we didn't do is detailed work on what all the sort of road rule changes and insurance changes and so forth that might be required because someone else is doing that. The National Transport Commission are doing good work on that. So we're almost a companion piece to that work that they're doing on regulatory change. And what we do is focus on road-based vehicles, so cars, trucks, road-based public transport, not so much about automation of trams and trains or them going to electric. That wasn't really the focus of our work. So how do we do this? So we did it over a period of a year, and we started off with a very intensive discussion with lots of stakeholders, including local government and industry, about, well, what are the key issues we've got to crack here to answer this question about infrastructure requirements? And then we created the scenarios that would test those key uncertainties and those key variables, and then commissioned 10 different packages of quite detailed technical analysis about what the implications of each of those scenarios would be, and published those findings for everyone to see. Because one of the things we do is go, all right, here's our evidence, here's what we think of it, what do you think? And that really helps improve the quality of the final report and recommendations, which we delivered in October of last year and is published and is able for you to see on our website. So these scenarios that I'm talking about, we really tested 7 different scenarios. So one is, what if the entire Victorian fleet is made up of battery electric vehicles? They're still driven by us, they're not automated, and individuals own them. And the year that we looked at for this in terms of modelling it in a technical sense was 2046. And we did 2046 because that is a period of time where it's plausible that the entire fleet could be battery electric, and also some of these other scenarios are plausible. I want to point out, we don't think that they are likely. So we don't think that any one of the scenarios I'm going to describe to you is the future, but rather these are scenarios that are plausible but extreme. And what we do know is that the likely future is somewhere within that big box of all those scenarios that we've tested, and we've used that to then inform our recommendations. So the next thing we did is, all right, well, what if all the vehicles are electric, but they're also automated? They're privately owned. What does the automation do for the way our traffic network works and the interaction with the public transport network, our energy system, our land use, and so forth? Then we changed it up a bit and thought, well, what if we don't own these vehicles? What if they're automated vehicles, they're battery electric, but they are run by fleets? Uber-style fleets, is not an endorsement of Uber, but that sort of on-demand fleets. What does that do to the demand? What does that do for the number of vehicles on the road? What does that do for our energy system? And then, because we need to keep Stuart happy, we thought, what if instead of it being battery electric, these vehicles are hydrogen fuel cell vehicles? So privately owned, automated hydrogen fuel cell, which does some quite interesting things to our energy demands and fueling requirements, of course. So it may be that in 2046, the uptake of these vehicles isn't so fast though. It might be that we've got a bit of a mix in the fleet. So that's our slow lane scenario, where we say, what if half of the fleet was the vehicles we're used to today? Conventional, driven by humans, internal combustion engines, but the other half are these on-demand, automated battery electric taxis. What sort of difference do we get to that? And then what if this happens really fast, which is our high-speed scenario? So what if this isn't all in 2046? What if these on-demand fleets are just so amazing that everyone says, I'm ditching my car, I'm going to use the on-demand fleets, and it happens in 2031, when we have a less advanced transport network and our energy system is a bit different to the way it's going to be in 2046. What does that mean for our infrastructure? Final scenario, hey, what if all this electric vehicle, automated vehicle thing just isn't it, right? What if it doesn't work for us? What if something better comes along, right? What if it's all a dead end? And so that is a way of saying, this is our base case, if you like. So what is our future transport and energy and other systems going to look like if none of these changes happens that we can compare everything against? So with these scenarios then, what we did was a bunch of quite detailed technical reports. Now this picture you can see is actually Sturt Street in Ballarat. And there's a number of other visualisations you can find on our website of various locations around Melbourne and regional Victoria about how our streetscapes might change with either full automation of our fleet, or in this case, partial automation, where the white vehicles that you can see are the automated vehicles, and the coloured vehicles are conventionally driven ones. And what we were doing with this is looking at, okay, well, how might our streetscapes change? But you can also, we did very detailed transport modelling for the first time ever that looks at the interactions of these different scenarios with public transport as well. So we're looking at the entire transport system. We did detailed energy modelling about what are the requirements that might flow. And probably an important thing to mention is our assumption is that when we're talking about zero emission vehicles, we're talking zero emission at tailpipe, but also at source. Because if we're serious about the contribution there to make, we have modelled up, well, what is the additional energy generation demand at a zero emission sense, rather than it just being the Latrobe Valley pumps harder than it currently is. We looked at, well, what are the environmental implications of this for both human health and emissions? We looked at what is the way international markets are moving for vehicles, and what are some of the policy and the technical developments that are happening there that we're probably likely to receive as a relatively small market in Australia. We looked at land use changes, and so where might it make a difference to where people live and work in these different scenarios, and did quite a lot of economic analysis about what does it mean for jobs, what jobs are going to be less required, and what might be new jobs, and what's the net effect on the economy, which you'll see shortly is positive. I want to give you a little bit of a sort of taste of some of these technical reports. I'll feel merciful, right, and not take you through all sort of 10,000 pages of them. That's for your own leisure. But just get a sense of transport modelling. So what we found is, in this example I'm showing you, this is when you've got the fleet street scenario. So the whole fleet of these on-demand automated vehicles. They're operating very effectively and efficiently, and there's very little congestion through we found in our transport modelling, which is why you can see lots of green there in the morning peak, which is something that you wouldn't normally experience on the average Melbourne morning. By contrast, one of the scenarios where you have private ownership of automated vehicles is that it drops you off to your work, which might be in the city, and then you don't really want to pay parking charges, so you send it home. So suddenly you've got a whole lot more congestion, and actually economically it makes sense for you to do that because your cost per kilometre is very low, and all of a sudden you've got something that looks like a bloodshot eye, which isn't really the way we or I'm sure the City of Melbourne would like our traffic network to be operating. So what that of course leads us to thinking about, okay, well, what are some of the policy interventions around access to the roads and road pricing that you might examine to avoid such an outcome? So I talked about energy modelling. Just want to give you a bit of a contrast here. What we found is that if you have private ownership of electric vehicles, be they automated or not, and you bring them home every night and you plug it in straight away and you've got no incentive to do anything else, you get what you can see on the left here, which is a whole lot of demand for energy layered on to what is already the peak period of demand. And so that leads us to think, okay, well, how can we avoid that sort of additional investment? Because people don't actually need to be driving that much at that time of day. It's just when it suits them to plug in when they get home. So if you can incentivise people to charge at other times, in particular off-peak, and if you can give them some of the technical charging tools and services that make that easy for people, you can really flatten the demand load profile. Now, not only is that kind of cool, it also makes billions of dollars of difference in terms of the investment we would need to make in energy generation and distribution. That is a big deal because that's, has effect on everybody's hip pockets who it'll be charged through to eventually. So here's another one of our visualisations just to show you. So this is the Monash Freeway, known and beloved to many of us. And this is showing a visualisation of what could, how could the Monash operate if you had the entire fleet automated vehicles. So you'll notice a few changes. Firstly, there's a whole lot more trees and greenery around close to it, which not only is that kind of nice, but it's available because these vehicles are far less likely to be making errors and crashing. You also see some cyclists by the side of the road. Now, I'm one of those cyclists that actually does cycle quite close to freeways anyway, but we're not going to be breathing in the emissions, which is a big difference, and or having much noise. You might also notice a big blue line down the middle, so you can have dynamic directional flow, which the vehicles can follow. Now, we're not saying this is the way it's going to be, but what we are saying is these are some of the changes that we could have in our streetscapes that these sort of technologies potentially allow us. So why else would we do it, right? So there's some really big potential benefits here. And this is the first time that we're aware of that anyone has done this sort of cross-cutting analysis for a state to look at, the various costs and benefits that might flow. So you could get around 2% gross state product improvements through the efficiencies and the changes in the Victorian economy that might flow from automated fleets. You can get up to 91% of congestion reduction. Now that's a really high number. We might not ever achieve quite that much, but our modelling under a range of scenarios shows that there's really significant congestion reduction available as an opportunity, which is also relevant to how much investment we then need to make for additional road infrastructure. Claire's already talked about the contribution that EVs can make to greenhouse gas reductions. Our estimate is around 25% of greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced, and much of that actually comes, of course, from the electrification rather than the automation. After that, it's just sort of some variabilities that occur, but that is a really big opportunity for us. Some really big health benefits which we've quantified. Some of this comes from additional physical activity, but most of it comes from not breathing in the particulate matter that you get from vehicle emissions. And finally, you can get a significant reduction in vehicle accidents, up to 94%. And the 94% figure is probably the very top of the range that we might ever hope for. That's the evidence available about the extent to which driver error is responsible for vehicle crashes. So it might not be that we achieve as high as that, but that's a really significant opportunity for us as well. So I guess the point I want to make is, yeah, this technology is really cool, especially the automation is really cool. You guys probably think the electrification is pretty cool too, I suspect. Yes, that's right, but there's some really big benefits to be gathered as well. It doesn't all come for free though. There are some changes to our infrastructure that will be required. And let's just give a taste of some of it. So for automated vehicles to operate effectively, they need two things. They need really clear lines and signs that to be able to follow. And so some investment in improved lines and road markings and road quality will be required. The other thing that they really benefit from is really good connectivity, so that they can navigate and operate safely. And that's especially a challenge in some regional areas. So we already have black spots. Here's another reason why black spots are becoming important for us with the increased connectivity of vehicles. And I've already mentioned the energy network upgrades. So we think you need a bit over $2 billion at least if you're going to deal with the additional demand that a fully electric fleet will have for generation and distribution. And it could be much higher than that if we don't deal with the peaks that you could be layering on to peak demand. Okay, that's quite a bit of money to invest, but remember all the other benefits I just described that you might gain from that as well. Now, we made a range of recommendations, and I'm not going to go through every single one of them. And if you're interested in a particular area, I recommend you have a look at the report, and maybe we can talk about that in some Q&A as well. But I guess what I'd like to highlight for you is this isn't just about transport. So what is happening here with these changes is it's the convergence of the energy sector with the transport sector. Sectors that aren't actually normally used to thinking about each other and as being connected. It's the convergence of ICT and the transport sector for these to operate. And it's also a blurring of what we think of as being public and private transport. There's real opportunities here for automated and electric vehicles to supplement how public transport works and some of its gaps at the moment. I'll leave it there, but I'd really encourage you to jump onto our website where you can find both the report, the videos that explain this, and also all the technical reports as well. Thanks very much.